have this session as an open discussion about EMDG's proposed changes, and so we can all share information. We have quite a bit of experience. We've been doing EMDGs for about 20 odd years, and Stuart and I have fairly strong views about it, but we want to know what everybody else thinks as well. And our interaction with ECAL is ongoing. Just what we'd like to talk about today: what are the proposed changes to the EMDG, and what do we understand they will be, why the current system was working, and what the changes will do to affect business in the exporting industry, and how these changes will make it difficult for exporters, or potentially more difficult to actually make the claims, how it will affect export sales, employment, potential expansion. We'd like to talk about how EMDG consultants will be impacted and what our role will be. And finally, we'd also like to discuss how EMDG consultants are going to operate in the future, and what can we prepare to do now for the changes. I'd like to hand over to Stuart to start the discussion about what the proposed changes are to the EMDG.
Hi, welcome to everybody. Thank you for calling in. We'll have a combination of people that have never done EMDG, experienced exporters, consultants, and others interested in the whole business of the export grant. So to set the background, the current EMDG has been operating since the 1970s in pretty much the same form, which is you spend the money on your export marketing on the eligible products with eligible expenses, and you get a reimbursement from the government for approximately 50% at the end of the year. Now, those rules have been set. The rules about how it operates is set fairly well in the existing EMDG acts that were they would go through a sunset every 5 years, be revoted on and continue on. Some minor changes would occur. They changed the number of grants that you could get, the amount of money would change in it, sales tests were introduced, etc. The new scheme that is coming out is fundamentally different in that, what's been taken out of the Act and replaced is that it is now a grants program rather than a reimbursement program, which means that the government will ask you to apply to nominate the amount of funding that you require, and they will then issue a funding agreement for the amount that they determine you'll get. And we'll go into the detail of what that amount will be and what some of the implications are. But that funding agreement will be set at the start of the exporting cycle rather than at the end of it. And it's a guaranteed amount, regardless of how big it is. It's a guaranteed amount that the government will then pay to the exporter if they meet the conditions of the grant. The issues we'll go into the issues, but that is the fundamental difference in this, that the government will be involved in both the start of the process and the end of the process when you have to acquit, when you have to tell them how you've spent the money and what you've spent it on. That process still has to take place. So just diving into that a little bit, we see some fundamental problems with the application process, in that it has to be done before July 1st, before you start the spending of the money. It has to, the application has to get enough information that you can satisfy all the requirements of being an eligible exporter, and at the same time has to be processed in time so that the government can then calculate the amount of money that people have requested and take that against the amount of money that they're prepared to put into it. The implication in the explanatory memorandum and the implication in the original documents that once they decided how much you're going to get, that money would be provided up front. However, if you have a look at the Act, what it says is the agreement will be up front. It doesn't say that that's when the payment's going to be paid. So from a financial point of view, the exporter is not a lot better off. They're not getting any money up front. They're still putting it in themselves. They're still getting it paid back after they've spent it. It's just that they now have an indication of how much they've got back. So if I can hand over to Rob for a few more minutes to talk about what we see as some of the other issues, and then we'd like to open it up. I appreciate everyone is on mute at the moment. Our moderator will open up the lines in effect, and also control. I'm sure we're all very interested, but if anyone gets too heated, we have a moderator there with a button that'll keep everybody happy, we hope. So Rob, if you can just take a little bit of this now.
Okay, well, some of the questions that came to mind when I was listening to the discussion with Austrade and the people who put this together last week was, is there an export test? Well, we've discovered there isn't going to be an export test. So that's interesting. As Stuart talked about before, how are they going to divide the money up when there's a set budget to work with, and they've allocated a certain amount to this year's claims and next year's claims because they're doing a 2-year or 3-year forward look on the approvals? What happens next year when someone else comes along and says, well, we'd like to do a 2 or 3 year? What happens to the money? Is next year's allocation in the budget already used up, already half used up? We don't know what that is. If anybody knows about these things, please, when we get into discussion, let us know. Will there be such an audit process as we have at the moment? Will there be, they say it's simplified. We're yet to see what that is in terms of the application. Do we need to fill out the same forms? Do we need to acquit the same stuff? Are they going to ask for more or less information? We don't know. Can exporters lodge plans without needing an industry body or somebody else to sign off on that plan, apart from Austrade? Could ECAL be actually fitting in the role of education and training? Are we as consultants allowed to do education and training? It's one of those questions. Are EMDG consultants still needed to prepare the applications? Are we all going to do that, or will the clients be lodging their forms themselves? Will the export consultants be doing applications in the new regime? I'm sure that we'll have a view on that. With fixed funding, there'll always be a shortfall, and nobody will get what they're after anyway. The change is just another layer of bureaucracy. Well, this is just my opinion, with a pre-approval process. There's no elimination of the application process and the audit process. I'd like to ask anybody else now if they have any ideas about the current system changes that are being promoted for the export industry. Do you like to open it up, Stuart?
Yes, so there's a couple of ways we can do this. One is just unmute yourself and put your hand up and say that you're going to speak, and a bit like a public forum, if the person's hand up, then we let that person speak. If that becomes unmanageable, we've got we can use the hands up through the reactions or the chat and ask to speak in the chat, and the moderator can mute and unmute people. But in the first instance, let's just treat it as a round table. If you'd like to put something on the table, let us know. While I notice we do have some reporters here. One of the things I'd like them to review is why industry associations such as the AI Group and the Export Council of Australia actually advocated for these changes when there is such a vast drop in the amount of money that's being supplied to their members. There's a 35% drop in the available allocation of funding from 1.2 million down to 770,000. Not only that, for their members they've effectively abandoned their members from the $20 to $50 million turnover limit. And it's a question that I'd like to put to some of the industry associations that wrote submissions supporting the Senate when they wrote into the Senate. But please come on board and let us know what you think.
Anybody out there like to make a comment?
Go ahead, John. Unmute first.
Yeah, just working on unmuting. I managed to press that button.
That's good.
My comments are all off the top of my head, and so on that sense, they may not be in any particular order. But if we think about this from the exporter's point of view, the idea that they get some certainty around the eligibility of their product and the company, on balance, to me, is a good thing. It's good to know that you're eligible rather than putting in an application as we've done in the past, going through all that effort and expectation and so on, and then finding out your business is not eligible. So I think perhaps the upfront thing is actually not a bad idea. The comments Robert made about acquittal are definitely an issue for the exporter. And I think the idea that the exporter has to manage or plan their future, be it 1 or 2 years, in the current environment is probably tricky. There was a time in the past when you could make 2 and 3 year plans. I don't think that's reality now. I think reality now is that you have to be ready to pivot from one marketing method to another marketing method to a different market as circumstances change and as opportunities present themselves. I think that's going to be a very tricky thing for business to do. On the other hand, Austrade has a mechanism within the system that will allow them to do variations. So my understanding is I could put forward that I want to spend, let's say, $20,000 on trade shows. I change my mind. I can vary that application because I've already got a number that I've been approved for. So the variations might offset any of the uncertainty around any export plan that an exporter has put together. From Austrade's perspective, the idea of processing many claims within a short period of time for the purposes of eligibility, I actually don't think it's going to be that difficult for them. And the reason I don't think it's going to be difficult for them is I think they're going to use some artificial intelligence. And it's not going to be that complicated. If you think about it, everything to do with the entity, i.e. the company or the applicant, are all matters of fact and they're all historic. So filling out a form that lists those historic and factual matters should be something that an AI system, current AI system, should be able to process, and any of the anomalous applications spat out for a grants assessor to look at individually within that 4 to 6 week period. So that bit I don't see as being problematic from Austrade's perspective. From the perspective of putting together the export plan and how that might be analysed, I mean, I would hope that Austrade will create a format that will allow people to give consistent export plan layout or methodology so that things can be compared apples with apples. From an exporter's point of view, that bit could work very well. Where I think the exporters, and potentially this is a service for consultants, is whether in fact, they do develop their own export plan, and secondly, the acquittal process that Robert had mentioned. The issue is going to be always around acquittal. What will the documentation requirements be? I think most of us would agree, in its most simple terms, the acquittal of an expense is an invoice and a bank statement from the entity that is applying. But we also all know that that's not how necessarily everyone runs their businesses. We get loan accounts involved. We get personal credit cards involved. We get all sorts of ways that people go about acquitting expenses through related companies and other events. So the acquittal process might be where the opportunity lay for consultants. I think I've probably held the floor for a little while there, but there's some of my initial thoughts that are coming out around EMDG 2.0.
Thanks, John. Others, please, if you put your hand up or just unmute yourself and come on in.
Hi, I'm a bit new to this field, but I have an interest, and I know that you mentioned that there was the 50 cent in the dollar rebate. With the new arrangement, is there potential, or is there potential to have more of a grant than the equivalent of a 50% rebate, or is that sort of like a standard benchmark that's being maintained?
Thanks, Tarek. The 50% is still the upper limit of the funding. So what you'll do, as our understanding, is that if you're a first-year exporter, you have a limit of 40,000 per year of government funding or $80,000 of eligible expenses. So you'll put your application in for $40,000 of government funding. The government will then decide how much money they can actually allocate to you. And it may well be that they can't allocate 40,000, they can only allocate 30,000. Similar to the current system, retrospectively, they'll say, no, you're only going to get 30,000 because we've allocated, we have an upper limit of what we're going to spend. What we don't know at the moment is, do you still have to spend 80,000 to get your 30,000, or can you now spend 60,000 to get your 30,000? In other words, if they drop the amount, do you still have to maintain your original funding request, or is it going to come back to 50% of whatever they've said that they will give you? Because the difference there is that if you don't spend the full allocation of funding, then you have to give the money back. So if you still have to spend $80,000 to get your 30,000, then will you pro rata? If you only spend a little bit, if you spend less than 80,000, will your amount that you get be pro rated less as well? These are all things that are going to come out in the funding agreement that you have with Austrade. The other thing is whether all these funding agreements are going. They talk about milestones. Austrade's preference, they've said so far, is one milestone. In other words, one payment. Now that payment is not going to be upfront, as I think a lot of people thought. Guaranteed amounts meant guaranteed money up front. The money still will not be paid up front. So we don't know if there's going to be any upfront funding to help you get on the road to exporting, or whether it's all still going to be retrospective funding. So that probably makes that whole question that you asked a lot more confusing now, Tarek, than when we started. But these are some of the issues we saw. Brad, you'd like to have a comment? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I think just on that point there, the whole way it was sort of sold to us is if you were going into an export market, the main benefit of going to this new regime was if you did have something to spend for 80 grand, you would only have to put the 40 in, and Austrade will kick the other 40 in. So we've sort of got exactly the same process, but we've got a bit more bureaucracy around the edges. So I don't really see that there's any huge material difference in what we've got at the moment, apart from probably giving the government more certainty more than anything. Another point that I've also got is I know certainly with my clients, when you do export marketing or any marketing for that matter, and it works, you generally do more of it, right? So in order to, I guess, not limit yourself, I would assume that most people will go for the maximum amount possible. And then the pool ultimately shrinks because they've got all the data together. And then a lot of the people actually won't even spend it, just for the sheer fact that they've gone for the maximum. So I reckon the government will be in front on this just for that sheer fact alone.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's good. It is designed with the amount of legislation that was taken out of the Act. In fact, parts 2 to 7, I think about 60 clauses, 60 sections of the Act were removed and effectively given back to the minister to make a decision at the time that it suits him. So it's certainly been designed to give the government more control rather than where everything was up to date. We had the guidelines, but everything was very prescribed in the Act. A lot of that prescription is gone and is back at a discretionary power with the minister or a discretionary power with the through the CEO. So if you want to speak, just unmute and let us know. Feel free to interrupt. I see a number of issues. I just don't see any simplification in this. I think John's right. There could be benefits for people in the certainty. They can second and third year, fourth year, fifth year claimants can have potentially a little bit more certainty because they're supposed to spend more. I think it disadvantages. I have a number of clients that spend a lot more than 160,000 over the 2 years. They know that when they make a marketing splash, you can go into marketing in two ways. You can gradually build yourself up, or you can accumulate and make a big effort in the first 2 years, in which case you'll spend the current maximum of 300,000. That's going to alter a lot of people's plans. I think the consultants out there, but also others in the industry of export, will need to work. Part of the raison d'etre for this was that let's make it simpler, like they've made the tax system simpler, like they've made NDIS simpler, and in theory, no consultants would be needed. But yet I've yet to see a government program that actually makes things simpler or removes the need for external advice over and above what the government provides. So I think that there is the opportunity in the export industry, that exporters will actually need more assistance with this application process and the planning process than previously in the past.
Stuart, that brings to mind, what about the acquittal and audit process, the current one that seems to drag on, and they shut down over Christmas and you don't hear from them till February? I'm just wondering whether there's any improvement in the process going to happen so that people actually get their money quicker, or is that they get their money and then someone looks at it after the event? Does anyone have any ideas on that? John?
I think my camera's in reverse and I can't work out which hand's which. But anyway, what I heard, Robert, I heard Dominic say from Austrade was that they hadn't decided whether acquittal will be ad hoc or monthly or or quarterly or even annually. They haven't made that decision. And on the basis of not having made decisions, I mean, one of the things that puts us both in a good position and a bad position is our knowledge of how the scheme works. And so it becomes possible for us to all speculate about that which doesn't exist yet. In other words, we get a sort of a particular viewpoint around issues that may or may not raise their head. No doubt Austrade is also considering those issues, and there may be things that we raise that they may not have thought of. Let's face it, they are designing on the run, and the comment I'd make about that is the government will do what the government will do, even if it is a dog's breakfast. They will. They will, and we as consultants and exporters as applicants will need to accept that what the government puts on the table is what is on the table. And there's going to be a certain reality to that. And the fact of it is it's not going to look like what we know. So there's going to be problems. And I think that also augurs well for consultants because of our past knowledge and understanding and trying to work with, and, you know, we've all got skills at working with bureaucratic systems and processes, that it may give more value to what we do than perhaps a lot of people perceive now.
The original intention of this forum was, it was done before the bills passed through Parliament, which they both passed through yesterday. So it is law, and it now is Austrade's baby to try and work out how to, the politicians can now go off of their leave, and Austrade shows some sympathy for Austrade in having to put this together. It would have been interesting. I did invite the two assistant ministers onto the forum. One of them is the regional tourism minister, and if anybody wanted to contact his office, I'd be interested to know how his constituents in Tasmania, which rely on tourism, appreciate the fact that they've now again lost money out of. What amazes me is that there was not more fuss made about the fact that there was 35% cut out of the whole program. At a time, we can't, you're right, John, we can't change. The government will do what it can do, but I still think there is the opportunity of, at a political level, influencing the way that Austrade put the program together. Because there are ways that Austrade can put it together that make a lot of bureaucratic sense. Politically, it may not make a lot of sense, and So there are things I think that can be done to get more funding into the program. I said I'm amazed that there hasn't been not more fuss made of that 35% funding, which is about $30 or $40 million that is coming out of the program over an 8 year period, you might say.
You make a good point, Stuart, and you know, at the end of the day, this is about money. It's about funding to assist exporters to develop markets for their products. You know, we hear those words all the time, but that is that at its heart, it's a means to get money into exporters' pockets to encourage them to do something they might not otherwise do. Brad made some really interesting points about the calculation, and you've made some interesting points about the calculation. Any which way they come up with this, I think it's going to have a confusing level at the other end. Now, it might sort out over time, but we need to remember that the budget is set. Although we do know that from time to time, ministers find more money and they up the equation. But the point Brad made about the calculation and how, I think you said, Brad, everyone could make a maximum claim and then vary their claim so that, in fact, they spend less, which means if you think about it, Austrade will always end up with some money back in its hand. It will always be able to make the argument that it was adequately funded because there is some surplus.
It'll always pare back what's provided in the original estimates.
If that happens, Robert, and there would have to be an initial payout nut factor to make the calculation based on what they offer in the grant agreements. And then secondly, if there was something left over because people had varied their actual claim down, there'd have to be a second tranche payment of some sort to come in and meet that number or nail that number on the head.
So if Austrade have set out to make it a more certain process and simplified, I think it actually hasn't happened.
Well, we shouldn't get too concerned about whether Austrade has, or even the government for that matter, has reached its goal, because, and again I hark on what I said before, they will do whatever they do, and if it is a dog's breakfast to start with, they will go back into the normal mode that they do, which is they'll start applying band-aids. There'll be revisions and adjustments and amendments and so on. And the beauty of the legislative instrument process that they've created, that from their perspective, is they can change that, you know, on a dime. They can flip that legislative instrument and make a change, and all they have to do to make it operational is register it with the clerk's office. That's all they need to do to make a legislative instrument operational. Now, the fact that it sits there under the disallowance period for 15 days is only relevant from our perspective if we decide that it's a dumb change and we want to get a disallowance motion up. But at the end of the day, the legislative instrument process gives Austrade the chance to pivot any changes, those band-aids that I referred to earlier, you know, almost instantly. So they will have that as a mechanism, and they'll have it in their minds that if they do start out and make some mistakes, and they're going to, I think, and they probably accept that, they'll be able to make those changes pretty quickly.
So basically that's not certain. Austrade can do what they want to, and they will do what they want to, and it'll change depending on how they are at the time. Things like putting back limits on particular categories of expenditure. They said in the meeting the other day, this is still not a competitive grants program, it's an entitlement program. But I feel that it may actually morph into being more of a competitive grants program because they're putting band-aids on, as you suggest.
Well, I think in that regard, we need to also perhaps put our politician hat on and consider the spin that is being delivered around the EMDG changes. So the spin is certainty and simplicity. And in a way, the application process is simple. I do genuinely believe it's going to be all matter of fact stuff, and you put in your export plan and you think that bit they can say is simple. And the certainty is embedded in the agreement. It doesn't matter whether it's a big number, a low number, the right number or the wrong number, it's a certain number. That will give the government, or sorry, that'll give any politician who is spruiking the value of EMDG 2.0 to make those statements with confidence, and they are unassailable. So that's from the political spin point of view. What we're talking about from our expertise and experience is the idea that the actual workings of this are going to be problematic. Just dovetailing and adding to what Brad was saying about the calculation. No one's spoken about GST yet. GST is going to get added to this.
Well, GST is an interesting one because there's no need to add GST if you're providing funds for people to do marketing to an overseas client. But you do need to add GST if the work's being done in Australia. So will your application have to indicate where you're going to spend the money so that GST can be applied correctly?
Stuart, I'm not referring to GST on expenses, or what I'm referring to is GST on the grant. GST will apply to the grant.
No, no, but my point is that the grant is designed to be spent on, in other words, the grant, if all your spending was overseas, there is no need to apply GST to the grant.
No, GST, well, if you get 30,000 granted to you by the government, it will include GST. Yeah.
Which is a zero-sum game.
Well, it's a nonsense. It's a nonsense, and it's going to be. I know we have all sorts of people listening, you know, but I'm trying to think of a nice way to say. I don't know how to put. It's going to be an extremely confusing thing how people and how Austrade calculate the grant if GST is involved.
Yeah. Someone asked there that, you know, will people miss out? And I think we've covered that. They if it's oversubscribed, some people that have made a valid application won't miss out. They will just get less money. The other problem I see is that because it's now an application process, if you decide, if you get to the 1st of July when this has to start, and you decide that you're now ready to export on the 2nd of July, you will have to wait 12 months before you can actually request access to government funding. So
why do you think it'll be 12 months?
Because Austrade are talking about one application period, which is going to be open from April to whenever, but yet they have to have all the assessments done by the 1st of July.
Oh, sorry, I see your point. Yes.
Which means that if you miss out on the application period, then, as I said, if you decide to then go and export on the 2nd of July, because an opportunity comes up or your product is now available for sale, it wasn't ready, for whatever reason, you can no longer then start your exporting process knowing that you're going to get some refund on it. You actually have to wait until the next application period, and then you have to wait until the 1st of July to actually know whether what your funding agreement is actually going to do. So this is sort of a comment for the exporters that we've got watching us rather than consultants, that your flexibility will be severely curtailed, I believe, with the new program. Certainty removes flexibility. I mean, it's a given that if things are more certain, then they're less likely to be flexible. Look, we've just gone past the half-hour mark. I'd like to take the opportunity to go round. We've got 20-odd people here listening. Comments from you that you would either like us to explore and come back with another forum, whether you think this has been valuable to you, questions that you've got or problems that you want to raise, because these questions coming to us will be passed back to ECI, which is the Export Consultants Association group, who will be, because of their expertise, will at least have some input, hopefully, into what Austrade's eventual outcome of the rules are. So this is an opportunity to provide us with a channel back to the ECI management and hopefully they can take whatever comes out of this forum on board, and whether you'd like another one of these as an update as we move through. So feel free to just make a comment if you would.
Good morning, everyone. It's Jackie Donoghue. I work for Austrade. I've been listening with interest to the discussion today, and I'm making a couple of comments in the chat box. Austrade, as you probably might be aware, has undergone a massive change, not just with EMDG, but within our internal structure and how we deliver our services. I understand what you're bringing up today. One of the main points of the changes to the EMDG was to try and ensure that clients that put in for an EMDG grant and budgeted on getting 50% of that expenditure back were then very aggrieved when it was oversubscribed, and many of them were only receiving maximum of 29 cents in the dollar. And they, and rightly so, then had many letters to Austrade and the ministers complaining about the result. So I think that was the main reason for looking at having a look at EMDG and how we can deliver it better. It's certainly our most valuable tool to get new exporters in particular exporting. The role of consultants has always been a very important one for the exporter. I was an exporter myself before I joined Austrade, so I'm fully aware from both sides of the coin. So I wouldn't be concerned as consultants that your role is no longer going to be necessary. For most of our new exporters and emerging exporters in particular, as you'd probably realise, exporting is a very resource-intense industry to be involved in. And they realise that this money is available, but many of them just simply don't have the time to navigate through the application process. So as consultants, I don't think you have reason to be concerned. And in fact, whenever there's changes to anything, consultants actually become more important because they're usually across the changes because it's their business to be so. I'm happy to take anything back to Austrade from today's discussion. I understand your concerns, but with change, there's always concerns, and there's always good and bad, particularly when there's money involved. Look, we recognise the importance of export to the Australian economy. I've just popped up a bit of a stat there on the contribution of exporters. It's our business of Austrade to increase the number of exporters. There's only less than 2% of Australian businesses exporting. We'd like to get more and more people exporting for various reasons, not just the monetary, but just diversification of income streams, etc. And it's been an interesting discussion, and I'm happy to take any of your concerns back to Austrade for further investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. That appreciate your comments there, and the fact that Austrade has taken the opportunity to participate. I understand the letters you would get when people didn't quite get the amount of money. I just feel that this process, what they've done is that those letters will now arrive when the funding agreement arrives instead of when the check used to arrive. I think you've just brought the letters to the minister forward by 12 months.
Indeed. Look, there's only ever a finite resource with any funding. So that's possibly always going to happen. You've only got to look at COVID and the number of funding agreements that were out there from all sorts of government organisations and all three tiers of government, and they were very quickly oversubscribed, most of them. So they just, the whole time with any of these funding or grants or whatever, everyone just wants to deliver the best outcome with the money that's available. And
can I ask, interrupt Jackie and ask a simple question?
Yeah.
If exporting is good for the economy and it's good for making money and good for expanding revenue and profit, has Austrade or the government done the macro level? How much does export actually add to the thing, and how much does the export marketing add to the exporting? So what I'm suggesting is, have we worked out how much bang for the buck we get for export marketing dollars? And if that works out to be positive overall, why is there a limit on the amount spent on export marketing?
Well, thank you, Robert. Indeed, there's no question that it's of financial benefit to the economy. There's always just a limit to funding and where we can put funds.
What I'm suggesting is that if it actually generates more funds than it uses, then it would be a business case to suggest that it keeps going more and more.
You would have noticed over the years that more money has been dropped into EMDG. They've widened the eligibility and what the grant can be used for as well. Our exporters are also changing over time. 40% of our portfolio now is services, and that's growing. So we have to look at how we can benefit all our exporters in a changing environment. So you can't just leave a program in place for eternity. You have to sort of look at it. I mean, I'm not defending any changes. There's changes. There's been changes indeed. Some of our exporters have actually said they feel this is a positive change. They prefer this grant system. So, you know, I haven't had a lot of feedback on it because obviously it's just a new program, but for those, we've run a few seminars on it internally and externally. And, you know, people mostly are reserving their opinion at this point. But, you know, it's sort of something that the Minister realises is our flagship program, and we want to deliver it in the best way possible. But, you know, this is very valuable feedback that they can consider. It's a very specialist part of Austrade, and I don't consider myself to be that specialist, although I do roll it out to our exporters. And, you know, we get lots of questions about it because it is one of the pretty much the only grant you can get for exporting activities.
Jackie, can I ask a question?
Sure, John.
I lodge approximately 50 claims and it takes me 8 months to achieve that. How am I going to do the same amount of business in 4 to 6 weeks?
I don't know, John.
Right. And the comments that have been made around the calculations of the grant, what we perceive through our experience and expertise as some of the perceived problems that are going to occur for Austrade. Can you tell us what it is Austrade intends doing about people that make ambit claims and then vary their claims back as time goes, creating a surplus into the system after the decision has been made? Could you answer that question?
Yes, that's a really good question, and I've made a note of that earlier to ask them about that, what is going to happen. I don't know, actually. I'm not a specialist in this area. I work in advisory. we have a whole team that sits behind EMDG, and it would have been great if we could have had someone from the team on there on today to address your concerns. But I'm sure that they would be available if, did anyone approach someone from the EMDG team at Austrade?
I'm sure there's lots of conversations going on. I did have another question, but it came into my head and went back out again. So I'll have to see if it's back.
What I'm going to do is we've done 45 minutes and we still have nearly everybody with us, so it's obviously of interest. However, I do know that people will have other things. So just one final round, if anyone would like to comment or throw things in the chat. The recording will be available. Sandra from her network that does this for us will make that available, or will make that available. And please come back to us with any feedback regarding, you know, yes, this was good, this was bad, we need another one of these, or who do I get in contact with to discuss this? More than happy to run these as often as people would like to. So yeah, so just one final round. Would anyone like to make a comment? With that, I'll call it going once, going twice, going 3 times. We will close off. Thank you for your contributions, and I hope you've had a learning experience, as they say, and I hope you have a great day and a good weekend to mull over some of the things that have been discussed today. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, thanks, Anne. Yeah, cheers.